Welcome back to the Coming Clean podcast. I am your host, Stephen Perkins. Spring has sprung. There's a new energy in the air. And speaking of energy, we're speaking with Politico's energy reporter, Josh Siegel, this week. Josh has been following environment and climate in the halls of Congress over the past couple of years. He's also the host of the Politico Energy podcast. And we talk about environmental journalism as well as what he's observed in the halls of Congress since being on this beat. Please enjoy this episode with Josh Siegel from Politico.
Welcome to Coming Clean, the podcast dedicated to common sense environmental dialogue, environmental optimism, and real environmental solutions. This show is proudly powered by Ørsted.
Josh, welcome to the show. Thanks for coming on.
Thank you for having me. Appreciate it.
So for those who aren't familiar, tell us a little bit about yourself and the work that you do at Politico.
For sure. I am an energy and environment reporter at Politico. I focus specifically on Congress. So I am in the halls of Congress whenever they're in session, any energy angle that they're dealing with. I'm the man on the ground talking to lawmakers, getting immediate reactions, doing more in-depth stories. And yeah, we have a large energy team here. Who, our other reporters kind of have more specific beats, and I kind of have my hands in all that if they need any help on an EPA story or an Interior Department story or a, Biden administration kind of specific executive story. I'm there with Congress. There's always a link to Congress. We're Politico, so that's kind of their core focus anyway. And yeah, so I've been here about 2.5 years and there's a lot going on. So it feels like energy is always kind of coming up on the floor or in hearings or all the time. So it's pretty active.
What is the growth of the energy beat at Politico been like? I mean, how has your team grown? What has your role turned into? I'm sure it's changed over 2 years. Talk to us about that.
We've headcount wise, we've stayed pretty much the same since I've only been at Politico about 2.5 years. I believe we have 8 or 9 reporters, and yeah, we're one of the larger policy teams, at Politico, if not the largest. And yeah, it's a huge priority at Politico generally, climate change in particular. So yeah, they're always trying to get, of course we have our Politico Pro, which is for subscribers, which is a paid platform, and our, our morning energy newsletter, which is kind of like our trademark, really main platform that we get out our news. But a lot of times we're having stories, go over to the main Politico.com site. It's a huge priority, especially from climate and just, broader energy and geopolitics and everything, that we've been covering on LNG, for example. So yeah, big priority here. And I think there's going to be even more emphasis on energy and climate, going forward.
Absolutely. Talk to us about your personal interest in journalism. What made you want to become a journalist? How early did that start? And, obviously you were at some outlets before Politico. What has that career been like for you?
Yeah, I've been a little bit non-traditional path. So I always wanted to be a sports reporter growing up, I don't know, as early as I can remember, probably like middle school. Just grew up in the Chicago area, big fan of Chicago sports. And yeah, kind of late in college, I just had a revelation that I don't know if I would want to I saw that more as a hobby, like sports. It's a good side project, but wanted to kind of expand my curiosities and just, get into beats that I thought were kind of like more important. And and yeah, I was interested in journalism, I like to write, but also just a very curious person, and the whole accountability aspect, that was always something that kind of registered with me. And then was kind of pretty late into finding the energy beat. It's been about 4 or 5 years at this point. I got into DC in about 2013, and I started my work at the Daily Signal, which the Heritage Foundation, a conservative think tank, kind of started a news site, and it was a brand new project, and they were looking for journalists who didn't have didn't have political leanings or whatever, and just had traditional news experience. And really interesting for me, kind of got me in the door, helped me, really establish, good connections, specifically on the Republican side and in Congress, and then eventually, establish really good credibility talking to Democrats and kind of, establishing a reputation as someone who really would give a fair shake to everyone, and, expanded my sourcing, and then went over to the Washington Examiner. That's where I found the energy beat kind of a year into that. And having looked back, Politico was a great opportunity to kind of work with a larger team and really more focused specifically on Congress, because I've always had Congress, in my pocket is something that I'm focused on. But I kind of usually, before Politico, had a broader purview. Did some stuff with the Examiner on agency coverage, EPA, administration. This was during the Trump administration, so did a lot on the administration, but it was kind of a lot for one person. Great informative experience, but really focusing in on Congress, I think has been great.
Yeah. And I'm interested in getting your perspective on just how the media landscape has changed over the past couple of years. I think number one, there's been increased scrutiny on media organizations, but also just a massive amount of information that comes out every single day. I imagine that you are following all sorts of different leads all over the place. What have you noticed in your years of being a journalist? Um, just about the industry at large and kind of how you've adapted to that.
Yeah, I think it's really competitive and only become more competitive, especially on energy and climate. I think the newsletter space is particularly, pretty saturated. It's becoming more so. I think it's, people kind of see it as a quick way to get your news and to bring in, insights kind of behind the scenes. And, it's what Politico really specializes in. So, yeah, I mean, I think also, being able to really tell your story and get at the news kind of quickly and being able to kind of cut through. Okay, what's the story? There's so much information out there. People get their news from from different platforms. I mean, some people, are getting it on social media or different different apps and things like that through their phones. So we're just making sure we're really and particularly energy and climate, I think, has only become more partisan as far as just how it's covered, and we just want to make sure we're really being fair and just kind of like getting at the truth as much as we can, and just being very direct and how we really get at the political element of, okay, this is being talked about, this is something people are floating, but here's where people are coming from, but this is actually like its prospects, or like this like this does this actually have legs, like kind of cutting through in that way and really leaning into our policy and political, kind of meshing those things together. I think we kind of do it better than everyone, having such a large team. We have now E&E News, as part of Politico. So just gives us more, more coverage, more. I mean, I think they have a slightly different audience than us, so being able to take advantage of that. But yeah, I mean, I would say it's just kind of gotten more competitive, more saturated. And I just think it's more important than ever that we, really stick to the facts and kind of tell people, what they need to know, and be concise and direct about it.
So let's explore that a little bit. How do you cover environment and energy in a way that does provide a balanced, objective perspective? Because you're right, we see a lot of opinion that seeps through, a lot of I think partisan reporting on it. What's your approach to make sure that you stay objective and that you're just relaying facts to people?
I think it's talking to as many people as you can, because I think it's really easy, especially on any policy beat, right? There's generally like a couple members or a handful that are really know a topic, or right, or a committee chair, or leadership, right? But you want to really expand your sourcing and just make sure you're understanding all perspectives, and clearly you can call out inaccuracies, or misleading statements, but you want to be sensitive and kind of ask, like I should have mentioned at the top, I also host our Politico Energy podcast, and we've had a lot of outside guests lately. It's kind of a new focus, and we've brought in members of Congress and really talked to Republicans, and I kind of try to strike a balance of making sure I'm challenging and kind of bringing in the facts, but being empathetic to their view, and having just making sure that we that there's a relationship. I think that's important, because if you're kind of out there just firing aggressive questions, and I mean, if the member doesn't know who you are, where you're coming from, it can be difficult. So I think establishing relationships and just really broadening like your sense of where people are coming from. So like, I mean, I think I've had really good success with Republicans in particular, just because I've been in that world. I've worked at Heritage. I was sometimes in meetings with them, like on their comms strategy and things. So, I mean, as purely as a journalist, just to help kind of inform their strategy on things and what conservatives were talking about on the Hill. But I think that's been helpful in that I have a strong understanding of where conservatives are coming from, and then Democrats. I mean, clearly, that this is climate in particular is a big priority for the party. So, easier to get their perspective on things and to kind of tell it. But just making sure I'm really talking to people and being empathetic and listening and asking questions.
In a similar vein, um, obviously, environmental reporting involves a lot of talk about the science. And we've even now seen that science can be manipulated and become a partisan thing. So, how do you ensure that you're accurately representing the scientific consensus on environmental issues through your reporting?
Yeah, I mean, I think we don't really like get into the debate around it because it's settled, right? Climate change is real. Man is the largest contributor. Fossil fuels are the largest contributor. So we don't really have a lot of hedging or right. I mean, there's not a really from my perspective as the journalist and as the writer. I mean, we don't really get into most scientists say or this or that. I mean, we're kind of stating the plain facts. But I do think, from my perspective, I'm careful to I know that the term climate crisis is something certain journalists use. I mean, I kind of try to avoid that one and just kind of put it in the, Democrats, see this as a crisis. I mean, most Republicans see it as a problem and they're acknowledging of that. But I'm kind of careful to, attribute here's how each side kind of views the problem as far as, its level of priority and how to go about addressing it. But yeah, I mean, we don't really get into too much, especially with my beat. I mean, we have like, a reporter who's our main like climate reporter, Zach Coleman, who does a lot around science and, reports coming out of, the UN or right IPCC and that kind of thing. So could really drill down more on science. But yeah, I mean, I'm just sticking to kind of the consensus and what, what's known at this point. And yeah, if someone's kind of flat out, denying, I'm sure we could call that out. And with President Trump, I know we're kind of former President Trump, we're kind of careful on how we frame his views and kind of things that he says. But yeah, I mean, it can be tricky for sure. But I think it's getting easier because on the Republican side, right? I mean, everyone's acknowledging for the most part that climate change is real, it's happening, right? So it's not. I feel like actually less so now that I'm longer in the beat. You really don't have to wade into that as much. It's kind of established, and okay, let's talk about the policy solutions on each side.
And more about the change that's happened on the Republican side, since you've covered this beat for 5 some odd years. Certainly, you've seen some of the movement that's happened in ACC. We started to help change some of that narrative and get more Republicans not just acknowledging that climate is an issue that they need to tackle and that people care about, but also being able to put forward solutions, being able to communicate in a productive way. What, from a broad sense, have you noticed have been the big changes just over the last 5 years, right, from Republicans on the issue of climate?
Yeah, no, I think it has been pretty dramatic. I mean, I think my one of my earliest memories on the beat, right, is the Select Climate Committee in 2019 that Democrats, then Speaker Nancy Pelosi set up, and there was this whole kind of behind the scenes effort to like which Republican would go on to be the ranking member of that committee, and there was a conversation around a former Congressman George Sensenbrenner who was more outwardly there was a previous iteration of that select committee, and he was used it as kind of a platform to be skeptical on climate change and to push back on the need to address it, and so he was in the mix again, and then ultimately Republican leadership at the time chose Garrett Graves, who's become very well known in the energy space, Republican Louisiana, to take on that position. And he's someone who they put forward as someone who acknowledged climate change is real, represents a district in Louisiana exposed to sea level rise. He's someone who had a lot of experience after Hurricane Katrina, restoring levees and dealing with that fallout. And yeah, I think that was like representative of where they were going. And they've just been very deliberate. I think it, former Speaker Kevin McCarthy, as you guys know, was I think on the forefront of that, and really thinking about it, I think, from a political perspective, of course, and being very direct around like, young Republican voters. This is an issue that they care about, and we need to have a policy, not just, nod to it, but have an actual policy agenda. And yeah, I mean, I think you've just seen that more and more. I mean, I do think, somewhat Russia's invasion of Ukraine and just kind of the elevated energy prices and what we've seen around, oil and gas production really roaring back as prices have gone back up after falling in the pandemic. I mean, I do think things are, pretty partisan. When you kind of see like House Republicans had an energy week, right? But yeah, just recently, and right, I mean, they've really put forward a lot of pretty partisan bills, kind of promoting fossil fuel production and attacking some Biden, legislative and regulatory climate action. So yeah, I mean, I still think it's a work in progress. Or I mean, one thing I'm really, when I'm talking to Republicans is really trying to say, okay, what policies are you supporting that really move the ball forward based on what the science is saying and what the consensus is on as far as these goals that that the globe is setting around net zero emissions. Like, what are you, we know natural gas is in your toolkit, and it's something nuclear, right? Carbon capture. There are certain technologies. I mean, well established, all of the above, right? This is a mantra they've adopted, but just really trying to push and say, okay, how are you going to move the ball forward? I mean, where are areas you can see working with Democrats? Yeah, I mean, I think you're seeing examples though, right? Nuclear is a big example that you're seeing bipartisan cooperation. Mentioned some of those others around carbon capture and things, but yeah, it'll be interesting to see like an Inflation Reduction Act. How does that play out in a potential Republican administration, Republican Congress? So yeah, definitely work in progress. But I have seen evolution for sure.
One of my favorite things that Congress does are these themed weeks. So, Infrastructure Week, I was a big fan of that. Now we do have Energy Week, as you just talked about. Take us through for those who maybe aren't paying close attention, and we can't blame them for that. Um, what is this whole Energy Week thing? What are Republicans putting forward? What observations have you had as a reporter covering this Energy Week moment?
Yeah, I mean, I do think it's a signaling of priorities, and even under new Speaker Mike Johnson, who is a Republican from Louisiana, who hasn't really had a great history. I mean, he hasn't someone who's focused too much, I should say, on energy, in his history in Congress. But yeah, I mean, it's clearly across Republican leaders is a big area that they feel like when they put forward a week like that, really promoting bills that they know that they have their Republicans, their ducks in a row. All Republicans, there's strong consensus around energy policy and around all the above, and again, just being I mean, there is a political element to this. I mean, I talked to people around Speaker Johnson's office, former officials in that office as well, who were with Speaker McCarthy, and yeah, I mean, clearly there's a political element of like, okay, there's been a lot going on in the House around right the spending bills and just the speaker change. Okay, where's something we could kind of unite our caucus and really send a direct message on the administration. You have these views on energy and climate. This is where we're coming from, and we're just going to put forward some bills that really show where we are on the issue. So whether that's whether that's poking at Biden's LNG pause that we discussed, or promoting permitting, of oil and gas pipelines, right? Things that they're really, clearly they can get their members on board with, and can maybe pick up a few Democrats from energy districts or states that might agree with them. So yeah, I mean, none of these bills that came up are anything that would go advance in the Democratic Senate. They're pretty upfront about that, but they kind of view it as a really a political moment and a uniting moment.
I know a moment for posturing and being able to, to your point, being able to show kind of where the conference is on that. Um, do you, what kind of reporting do you also do on the Senate side, and do you find that is there disconnect between House Republicans, Senate Republicans, and the agenda? Is it pretty reconciled at this point? Just observations there.
On the Republican side in particular.
Yeah.
No, I think pretty much in sync from as far as the House and Senate Republicans who are active on these issues, whether it's a John Barrasso, ranking member of the Energy Committee, or it's Senator Shelley Moore Capito, right, ranking member of EPW. I mean, these are senators who've worked on bipartisan bills, just like over in the House. We mentioned Garrett Graves, we mentioned Kathy McMorris Rogers, chair of the Energy and Commerce Committee, Bruce Westerman, chair of Natural Resources. I mean, these are serious members who Westerman, for example, is active on the permitting issue, which we know is one of the policy areas you guys are tracking and that I'm tracking really closely, where there's still hope on both sides for people who are active on this issue to get something done, where they see a merging of interests of permitting kind of the types of projects that Republicans have historically cared about, and then Democrats, right, this need for transmission and to really boost clean energy deployment. So I do think you're seeing a lot of in sync. Of course, you're going to have people on the fringes more in the House side who just are dismissive of climate and kind of the need to have any policy set. But I would say, I mean, you've seen the Conservative Climate Caucus really grow in ranks, and you have a wide range of members in that, including Freedom Caucus. The Conservative Freedom Caucus has representatives in that. So yeah, I mean, clearly the House is a little bit more partisan on the edges, but I do think there's pretty strong consensus in both chambers around like climate. It's an issue. It's not our biggest priority, but it's something we should have a platform on, and we're really promoting American energy dominance and like all types of energy.
So I think, as I talk with people who are not the most politically engaged, but certainly they're watching news or they're on social media, I think a lot of Americans see Congress as a big, happy, dysfunctional family. Certainly underline on dysfunctional. But some of the members that you mentioned there, those are always kind of the names that I bring up of reasons why there's still hope. Like there are certainly still a lot of serious members of Congress who take their job very seriously, really want to lead with solutions. And then to your point, there are people on the fringes. The question that I want to explore is the role that reporting, specifically environmental reporting, plays on the public policy making process. Because my thought, and push back if you think I'm wrong, my thought is that sometimes the increased attention on these issues makes it harder for bipartisan solutions to make it to the forefront, and that sides feel as though they need to really draw a line in the sand in order to make it clear to their own constituencies that where they stand on these issues. Your observations on does increased reporting in these issue areas make it harder to then create law?
Yeah, I mean, hard for me to say. I mean, I would definitely like say that reporting there's value in covering, right? I mean, if you kind of left it to each side to talk about here's what Energy Week meant. I mean, you would have one side saying it's this is the way our policies need to go, and we're gonna right. The Republicans would probably overstate just like where these bills are. Oh yeah, we've punished Biden, we did it right. But and on the Democratic side, okay, this is all. They're in it for the fossil fuel industry, and they're in the pockets of the fossil fuel industry. So, I mean, I do think it's not like these members aren't out there, on social media or whatever, like promoting what they're doing. So it's not like they're quiet about it. And I do think the media has a role of kind of cutting through that and, okay, here's the partisan talking points, but like, here's what's actually going on. So, yeah, I mean, I think as long as, I mean, from the way I approach things and the way Politico, it's hard to speak for others on, maybe they are detracting from that. But I mean, I'm always focusing on, areas where there is bipartisan nuclear, right? We just saw a bill come up in the House that passed the House that would, streamline licensing and, made sure to go to the Senate side and like get a sense of, is this something that you guys are working on, bringing over to your side and negotiating and, made clear that they are. And maybe if we didn't have, that story, people would just think this was another bill that was destined to kind of die and just make it through one chamber. So yeah, I mean, I think if you're approaching it the right way and sticking to the facts and beyond the talking points, I think I would say there's probably more value in what we're doing.
Now, let's take a look at this Congress up until now, and think back on your stories. What have been the stories that you felt have been the most impactful, or even maybe the most challenging over this Congress?
Yeah, I mean, the stories I'm most proud of, I'd say we had a story on the 1 year anniversary of the Inflation Reduction Act I worked on with a colleague, Kelsey Tamborino, very data driven. And we did our own mapping of kind of like where these projects that are claiming incentives are happening. Well documented. A lot of these are happening in Republican states and districts for a lot of different reasons. But Kelsey and I kind of spread out across the U.S. and shows three different parts of the country where we're seeing a lot of activity, and just getting on the ground and like talking to the politicians in these communities, everyday people, just getting a sense of like how is the project resonating, where is it in the process, because I think a lot of times people expect, right, that you know there's activity immediately and construction is just kind of starting, but we know it takes time for these projects to really resonate in the community. How much are they attributing it to policy? How much do people even know that the Inflation Reduction Act is something that these companies themselves are claiming as a reason for bringing these projects to the United States? So I think that took a lot of time. I think the data element was really cool, and I just thought the approach we took was pretty unique. So that'd be the biggest one. And I'd say the work I do on permitting. I mean, we've broken tons of stories in that space, and I just think it's a really interesting policy area. One of these that there is on its surface, and I do think there's truth to it. It very bipartisan, but I think there's differences in approaches, and just making sure I'm really reporting out where each party kind of stands, what any movement that we're seeing in that space, what it means, what it doesn't mean. And then, of course, again, the work I do around Republicans, always proud of that. I feel like it's still. I mean, there is more attention to what Republicans are doing, but it's still, I think, an area where I've distinguished myself, and um, you know, focusing on who are leaders. We needed John Curtis, right? Identifying him. I know he's a big name now, but someone we identified a while ago and have developed a good relationship with, and uh, and yeah, now really focusing on his Senate race and things like that, and trying to be out in front on whether he's registering out there statewide, name recognition wise. So hoping to visit him on the campaign. So yeah, I mean, so those are the three areas that I'm proud of so far.
Right on. And I definitely recommend that people check out your IRA anniversary article, because that data, I agree with you, is really fascinating to look at it. And we've used that a lot as we talk with both members of the general public as elected officials, showing that there's a lot of benefit from that money that can go into more rural or conservative areas. So that's fascinating. I want to, as we reach the end here, I want to go into some of our sort of rapid fire questions that we do at the end. Um, and the first one, we talked a little bit about how you got interested in journalism and what that career path has looked like. But if you were to sum up sort of your primary motivation, your why behind the work that you do, what would you say that is?
Yeah, I mean, I'd say now it's just more important than ever to really communicate what's happening to the public, because there's so many ways that people are getting their information, and a lot of it is kind of illegitimate. I mean, ways, to be honest, right? I mean, it's hard to distinguish kind of what's what on the internet, or what you're seeing on your social media apps. So I just think with a very consequential issue, and one that policymakers are really focused on, like energy and climate, it's more important than ever that we're challenging people in power around what they're doing to deal with it, and we're also kind of communicating clearly and accurately like what they're doing, and what various policies would actually mean for tackling these issues. So yeah, I think the role of media on this beat in particular, if you're approaching it the right way, is more important than ever.
And I'm also curious I always like asking journalists what media they're paying attention to. So what does your media diet look like, and what are you, reading and watching and consuming day to day?
Nice, nice. Yeah. No, I'm a huge consumer of all types of media. I told you about my sports background, so I'm, read a lot of sports content, listen to a lot of sports podcasts to kind of escape what I'm doing. But as far as, competitors and things like that, I like Axios, of course, similar kind of format to us with their focus on newsletters. Washington Post, I like for, more kind of local coverage and political coverage. I'd read the New York Times for global coverage, Wall Street Journal, really getting into the business stuff, Bloomberg as well. And then I'm very big on podcasts, whether it's the niche energy podcast area. I've got a handful that I have in my regular diet. Whether it's Columbia Energy Exchange, right? They have one out of Columbia University. I'll start to listen to yours. It wasn't in, it wasn't in my menu before, but I actually didn't know about it. So we'll get into that. But yeah, I always try to just like hear as many perspectives and just like pick up knowledge on the energy beat as much as I can. And then yeah, my escape is sports. So a lot of sports as well.
Right on. So I want to come back to the podcast thing in a second, but I also like to ask a book that you would recommend to our audience. It could be a classic that you read a while ago that you think everyone should read, or it can be something that you read recently. Do you have anything in mind there?
Yeah, so a recent book that I am actually in the middle of reading, have not quite finished, but it's called The War Below. It's by Ernest Scheider, and it's basically about critical minerals and just like the mining issue and just this global competition that we're seeing for lithium, copper, right? This focus on onshoring the United States and onshoring these supply chains in the United States and reducing reliance on China, and just how complicated it is to kind of source these materials and how it's happening in a lot of places, with mixed records to be nice about it, right, in various parts of the world on human rights and yeah, how it just it's a really interesting read. They also bring a really good human element and profile. Ernie does a great job of profiling certain people who are active in this space, business leaders, things like that, people on the ground in some of these areas that have a lot of resources. So that's a book. It just came out actually, and I'm in the middle of it now. But that's an interesting one.
And then since you are a podcaster and you're a big consumer of podcasts, is there, you mentioned a few a couple of seconds ago, but is there one podcast that you recently found that you're really excited about, or even an episode of a podcast that you would recommend people check out?
Yeah, I mean, other than Politico Energy podcasts, I like the Big Switch is one that it's a product of Columbia University, but you have to subscribe to it separately or whatever, download it separately. But yeah, it's called the Big Switch, and they actually have a series right now that's focused on the battery, critical minerals issue, and just they have like I think there's 5 parts, and they just visit a battery factory in like Ithaca, New York, and like try to unpack what brought what explains this company coming in and like onshoring this manufacturing facility. What are the complications around getting that up and running and competing with China in this area? So yeah, they spotlight like different parts of the supply chain in each episode. So really informative. And yeah, again, I'm attracted to like podcasts that not always like talking heads, but like is actually right, like journalism, or like, okay, I'm on the ground. I talk to, it's not the kind of thing I get to do a lot with my podcast, but so I kind of value that storytelling aspect as well.
Great. And tell us how we can find your podcast.
My podcast, yes, it's just called Politico Energy and available, I'm sure like yours is in any, whether it's Apple, Spotify. And we are trying to do, like I said, more outside interviews. We had Ali Zaidi, Biden administration's top climate official in the White House just a couple of weeks ago. Garrett Graves, who I mentioned, was just on Monday. Very recently. So yeah, trying to bring in more outside guests, and we're very short, 15, 17 minutes with these interviews. So it's kind of like I can, I get right into the questions just like you are, and just really, really hit the questions and be I think they're interesting listens. So it's a combination of talking to colleagues about their stories and also, really talking to policymakers and challenging them about issues of the day.
Great. We'll hopefully send some people your way. I want to end with this final question of what are you most excited about right now?
Like generally?
It could be something within your beat. It could be, personally, I mean, whatever you got.
I mean, yeah, I'm excited to just see what, I mean, this is kind of, nerdy lane, but like what happened, we're in the political world. So just what goes on, how the election plays out, and just like, yeah, there's just so much up in the air. I think it's a really, important, exciting time around like the future of energy, climate policy. And there's just so much at stake, I think. And it'll be interesting to see as much as, I think a lot of people are dreading this election. I do think there's an excitement level of like, how exactly this all plays out. But yeah, personally, I'm about to go back on a baby leave. I've got a 7-month-old, so I'm excited to spend more time with him, and maybe in the middle of election season, take a little month reprieve from that. Get outside. It's springtime. Go on some walks with him, and starting to enjoy him more, that now that he's like a functioning baby who you can interact with, and is not a newborn. So yeah, a mix of professional and personal.
That's awesome. And for people like you and I who are just insane, the excitement over the election, I understand that. Most people are not, but we have a reason to be, I suppose. Well, Josh, thanks so much for coming on the show. Really appreciate it. End out by telling us where people can now find you on social media and get connected with you.
Oh, sure. Yeah, I'm very active on I guess not Twitter anymore, X. My handle there is Siegel Scribe, so SIEGEL Scribe. And then I also I'll post a lot of my work on LinkedIn, or if you want to connect with me there, it's just my name. You can find me under my name. But yeah, I do most of the sharing of my work on X through the Siegel Scribe handle. But yeah, also I encourage you to subscribe to Morning Energy, the newsletter, where a lot of my content goes through there, just because it's a big Congress audience. So yeah.
Great. And we're still going to call it Twitter on this show. But thank you for coming. Thank you for coming on. We appreciate it.
Yeah. No, appreciate thanks for having me, Stephen.
Thank you again to Josh for coming on the show. Please do go check out and subscribe to his podcast. And while you're in the mode of subscribing to podcasts, you can subscribe to the Coming Clean podcast on Apple, Spotify, wherever you get your shows. Also, make sure to follow ACC on social media at ACC_national, and let us know how you enjoy this episode and all of our other content. We look forward to connecting with you. Until next time, take care.
And before we jump, the Coming Clean podcast is grateful to be powered by Ørsted, a wonderful company strengthening America's energy security with reliable and domestic clean energy. Through its integrated renewable energy solutions, Ørsted is creating American jobs, investing in American communities, and driving American innovation, all while preserving our country's natural habitats. A clean energy future truly connects us all, and Ørsted is helping lead the charge. To learn more, visit us.orsted.com.